The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. For obvious reasons, over the 17 years of our program, we've focused on education maybe more than any other subject. And in this day and age, in New York City, with ongoing dialogues about the nature of testing and child assessment, the movement toward charter schools, questions about overcrowding and teacher training, grades for schools, and renewed concerns about college preparedness, we brought a couple of experts into the studio tonight to talk education. If you want to join the dialogue with questions or comments, or even to share anecdotes about your own experiences, don't hesitate to join us at 718-960-7241. You can also email comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our show. But for tonight, please join me in welcoming a retired social studies teacher in the Bronx, Woodlands High School and Scarsdale High Schools as well, who is now a field supervisor and adjunct at Fordham University, a mentor of Teach for Americans in the Bronx, and a staff member of WISE Services, which is an organization that helps high schools create and run experiential learning programs for seniors. All that is David Green. Thank you, Mr. Green, for joining us. And a reviewer of public schools for the highly regarded Inside Schools website. She's a former public school teacher in the U.S. and abroad, and is a member of the Center for New York City Affairs Education Project, and an expert, or at least knowledgeable, in college preparedness. Welcome to Erin Bloodworth. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Green, let's start with you. You sent me a host of materials and some of your philosophies, and you and I have communicated over the last couple of months about educational issues. In some of the materials, you quoted this more than once. You said a wholesale hostile takeover of the last remaining American industry, education. Mm-hmm. What do you mean?
Well, if we take a look at American history, and for 38 years I taught history, and a lot of it is political and economic, and how the two always manage to get tied up with one another. One of the things that you notice is that when there's an opportunity to seize hold of an industry, people do. With all the globalization that's gone on and the outsourcing that's gone on and manufacturing that's gone on, and everybody's looking to see, well, what's left in this country that we can actually become an entrepreneur or increase our business or profits in? It's become education, whether it be the pushing and sales of tests, the wholesale marketing of what are supposedly teacher-proof curricula and programs for schools, or to the fullest extent of creating for-profit charter schools and telling everybody how wonderfully they're doing when they're actually not doing as well as they're saying.
So your summation, as we start the show with the summation, so your summation is actually all of these controversies that I alluded to at the introduction, and that is the testing that's going on and the various types of assessment, certainly the movement toward charter schools, is all financial driven and financial based, that somebody says, you know what, this is an industry that we should make money from. Let me just go one step further. Mm-hmm. So that the philosophies that we're getting from, let's say, Mayor Bloomberg, from even the top down from Arnie Duncan and at the federal level, all of these things in your mind are because there is a financial industry looking to make a buck.
As part of it. I think there have always been people who have been looking to make dollars in anything. As far back as 1970, when I first started teaching, there were always people who were pushing curricula, or they were pushing programs, and they were trying to get schools to buy whatever it is they were selling. ETS started out as a very small organization and now has become a worldwide industry unto itself. So when people see that kind of success, they're apt to try to replicate it as often as possible. So when the schools became more questionable and the issues came up that started with A Nation at Risk in 1983, and then again No Child Left Behind, and now the Race to the Top, all these opportunities for reform have come up. And instead of actually thinking about, in a lot of cases, what education actually means, there have been these mass manufactured kinds of remedies. Some of them for profit, some of them for political profit.
What's been the effect, given, let's just assume that your philosophy is correct, but what has been the effect of this new view of education, and how has it played out in the schools? Certainly New York City schools and Bronx schools would be our focus.
I think there are a number of things that have come up as a result of it. The us versus them issue that's popped up, teachers being the evil, unions being the devil that corrupted the evil teachers. All the things that are going on now that are actually forcing a lot of good, experienced people to leave earlier than they had planned, retire sooner than they had thought they might, and for new teachers, once they get involved, and for people who came in with a lot of creative juices and a lot of ideas and a lot of thought, now they're finding once they get involved in the schools, creativity is gone. You can't do certain things. The idea of innovation and initiative oftentimes is run by somebody from the top up rather than from the bottom, from the top down rather than from the bottom up in terms of what went on into the classroom. So there are a lot of good experienced teachers are actually leaving.
We're going to bring Ms. Bloodworth into the dialogue in just a moment. I want to get a sense from you, because you work with so many young teachers, what's the morale like, and is it difficult to convince them, again, given what, making the assumption that what you're saying is true, giving those factors, is it hard to get them enthusiastic about doing the very difficult job that you need to be enthusiastic about of teaching?
So much of it depends on where they are. So much of it depends on the particular school that they're in. Now, all of the schools that I work with and all of the teachers that I've been working with over the last 4 years are all Teach for Americans. So they've come in with a lot of creativity. They're highly selected. They're very bright. They really want to do. But when they get there, they are so extremely frustrated by the limitations of A, the training that they received, if one is to call it training that they had from TFA, and B, the supervisors or lack of supervising they have at the schools that they're in, and the fact that they feel like they're almost in this lockbox, that they have so many ideas that they cannot use because they're being told you have to do this and you have to do it this way. And what they're finding is that this way doesn't seem to be working. And when they try it another way, they're told they can't.
Ms. Bloodworth, you visit schools, you talk to teachers, you talk to parents, you talk to pupils, and folks can read a lot about what you do on that, again, wonderful website, InsideSchools.org. It's an independent website and a way of looking at New York City schools. What's the morale like? I mean, what Mr. Green is alleging is that there'd be a lot of people upset. He talked about us versus them. Is it palatable? Is that evident in the schools? Or is it just us folks who are on the outside and not in the schools every day, we're putting something on them that doesn't really exist?
Well, again, like you said, I think it really depends on where you are and what school you're in. And you see schools where it seems like every teacher loves their job, they look forward to it, they're in early, they stay late, and it's because they want to. You see other schools where the teachers are, often TFA, they're in kind of harder driving, we're going to catch these kids up, we're going to put these kids on a track for success, where their actual day, their actual contract is to work from 7 a.m. before the students get in until 6 p.m. They're expected to do work on weekends, to take on extra activities. And those teachers are the ones, often TFA, younger teachers, who are kind of willing to put that in at the start of their career, who tend to burn out.
Both my parents were teachers, so I know a little bit. I mentioned to both of you before the show, so I know a little bit about it. I mean, I certainly remember my father going in early in the morning and working till late. What's wrong with contractually obligating a teacher to do that and say, look, this is what it takes to teach. I'm not sure why that would be something that would burn a teacher out now when maybe they weren't burned out before when my parents were working.
But were they actually working that amount of time for that amount of pay and not? I don't know, I think it's different if you're in a supportive environment where you really, really love what you're doing, as opposed to somebody who didn't know necessarily what they were doing out of college and got a job in a school that's maybe not the most comfortable place to be. I mean, I've seen a lot of the network schools, and these are more charters, but they tend to have very hard driving, very no excuses attitudes where, you know, they do oftentimes get results, but they have the students in the classroom from 8 a.m. until 4:30 p.m., and the teachers are doing that. They don't have breaks, and then they're also working overtime, working on weekends, and it can be a lot in such a high-intensity environment.
As someone who's crossed the generational line back and forth several times, it's interesting that you say that, because as far as I remember, there have always been people who came in at 7 and left at 5 and worked extremely hard and extremely diligently. I think part of it is the idea that now I'm not sure if the contractual issue is the issue. I think we kind of get sidebarred by this whole thing. We go off to, well, should they be forced to do it or should they not? I think the biggest issue is what you talked about. What's the teaching environment like? Mm-hmm. Do you have enough time during the course of the day to prepare? I meet with my first and second year students, and I go in and I meet with them ahead of time, and we have a preparation kind of thing for what they're going to plan to do and an observation. And I say, all right, well, when I come in and observe you, I want to make sure that I have time to speak with you about what just happened immediately after. I don't know how many times where we've had that schedule where all of a sudden the principal has called them and say, you're now on the data collection committee. So instead of having the time to actually work on their teaching, they're spending a lot of time collecting data.
Something else.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I was going to just interject to really what both of you were saying, that maybe it's a matter of assessing whether a young teacher has the commitment, and if you have the commitment, well, then you're doing it. On the other hand, it may be something else that's motivating them. I wanted to get back to really what both of you said, but I'll start with you, Ms. Bloodworth, about you both said it depends where you go. In the schools that the morale is not good, what's the difference from your assessment, from what you see, versus the schools, well, things seem to be productive and things seem to be doing well, without making a generalization about the whole system?
Well, it's kind of difficult to answer that without making a generalization, but I think the biggest thing is the administration and the principal. Mm-hmm. If you have a supportive, confident principal who communicates effectively, who's willing to talk to their staff and hear what they have to say, you're going to have a staff that's much more willing to feel invested in the school, to put in that extra time for that administration, and to really try to communicate as a staff and grow as a staff. When you have, I've been in buildings where I've heard principals, get on their walkie-talkies and say, get in here now. No explanation, no reason why, and it's because they wanted them to give me a tour of the school. We'll let
you've been around a little longer. You see more of that now than you, listen, every
leadership is always the key, and I think it's the key in whatever it is, whether it's education or coaching, which is something else that I do. And you want to work not only in a place that's hospitable, but you want to work for somebody who's encouraging. And one of the things that I always try to do with the new teachers that I work with is to give them encouragement where they may not be getting it. And again, the same thing is true. The kids who continue, the kids who stay, and the kids who want to continue, almost all of them have been in schools where they have been encouraged, not restricted in what they do. And they have been given a sense that they belong to something, as opposed to being told what to do all the time. And that sense of belonging is a very important key to success.
Do you think there's a lot of pressure on the principals because of this grading system, that they're being told now, you've got to achieve, or, everybody's watching, did our school go from an A to an F, or an F to an A, or an A to a B? And is that a factor?
It takes a lot of guts for even a principal, all right, to be able to stand up to the bureaucracy that you've just described. But there are those who do, and there are those who can say, here are the results.
And And Aaron, you're able to see principals see their way through to being creative, to doing it despite maybe some of the other pressures?
You absolutely do. It's not across the board. I mean, I see a lot of newer principals who come from other backgrounds, business backgrounds, some other kind of non-education based background that they go through, and they do a leadership training and they become a principal or an executive principal. And those, not always, but they do tend to be the ones that are more hard driving. School's like a business. It's very, kind of how the city is being run at the current time. And in those schools, you end up, everything's very data focused. The kids are being tested every 4 weeks. The data's up on the wall. Everything's about the numbers.
For your sense, in those scenarios, those are the places where morale is not great, and you can make that correlation somewhat.
Generally, I mean, not 100% of the time, but
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, I would say much more often when you see a school where they really focus on creativity, or they focus on the arts, and they focus on, I hate to throw out the whole child, but those.
A holistic approach.
Yeah,
to
it's
education.
a holistic approach.
You can also understand something, that the word principal comes from the two-word phrase, principal teacher, because the leader of the school was always the principal teacher, and it got shortened to principal. And you can have somebody who's hard driving, but if somebody is an expert in teaching and an expert in education and an expert with kids, then they can be hard driving as they want to be, but people will respect that leadership because they know what you're doing as a teacher because they've done it themselves.
And this would go back to your original hypothesis, and that is that if it's financial driven, you may not have educators in that role.
Exactly.
Right.
I want to get into another whole thing that is, I think, very important, and we'll quote some numbers here. In New York City, the last studies have shown 21% of the students who started high school in 2006 graduated last year with high enough scores on state math and English tests to be deemed ready for higher education and well-paying careers. Let me repeat the number, 21%. That means 79% of the youngsters who started high school and graduated did not have enough English and math to be ready for college education and well-paying careers. That seems like a really big problem because the end result is lacking, to say the least. Why is that happening?
Well, I think a big part of it is that it's always happened, but it hasn't always been expected that students will graduate high school and go on to college. Now, with how technical and how global the economy's gotten and the United States has gotten, it's almost impossible to get a job that you can sustain yourself and a family with when you don't have a college degree. So we're taking a system that worked to educate the best and the brightest anyway, and we're trying to make that system work for everyone, and it's just not going to happen. Everyone can learn enough to go to college and be successful in college, but the way that our system is set up now to be uniform for everyone, not to be as good at differentiating, not to give individual attention, it's not going to happen.
So let me ask you, and then I'll ask Mr. Green to weigh in on it. Mayor Bloomberg rather famously said recently that, well, college is not for everyone. Do you agree with his statement, and has he aligned the schools to fit that mold?
I think, unfortunately, college is not for everyone, but the way that our system is set up, college has to be for everyone. And so in order for that to happen, we have to change our system. Right now, the way that kids go through from K to 12 and then they're expected to go on to college, that's not going to work for everyone. It doesn't even work for the majority of people.
Do we need more, say, vocational programs or technical programs of one sort or another to help some people achieve and be productive members of society in other ways? And I guess along with that, I have to ask, if you do that, are you remanding or precluding some people's opportunity before they even get a chance to maybe achieve academically?
Well, that's definitely a tough question, and a lot of people will disagree with me. But I think having more programs, having more vocational and technical programs allows people to have the option to go into careers. Total aside, but I actually went to cosmetology school, and most people you see, it's to do hair, and most people you see doing that have have dropped out of high school, don't really know what else to do, don't really have another option. And
So where does
they're-
that notion fit into what you're saying? Because you
It's-
were educated, you have a master's degree, et cetera, et
It's
cetera.
just, I guess, saying that I have a firsthand account of seeing what some vocational programs
There-
can
All
be
right,
like.
so
follow-
Green, let's
yeah,
toss
Yeah.
it to you.
Yeah, to follow up, I want to back up to the idea that the only way you know if you're college ready is what you do on a math and English exam. That's only a small portion of the issue. What the really big issue is that schools are not preparing kids, especially now when most of what we're doing seems to prepare them to taking the tests, which seemingly is not working anyway, is to give them the kind of critical thinking and problem-solving skills that really make somebody college ready or career ready. And that is being de-emphasized with the stress on math and reading tests. So when you're talking about
What other skills? I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate.
time
here.
management, the idea of learning self-discipline, how to communicate with others, how to work collaboratively with people, how to figure out what you are interested enough in doing so that you can follow up, and actually the process of learning how to follow up. But
And
most
you think
yeah.
learning, for example, learning math and doing the strategizing that's necessary in doing a complex math problem is not indicative of those things?
I think if you take kids and you look at successful programs where you want to teach math concepts and you teach it in an applied manner, engineering can be taught to elementary school kids. It's done. Physics can be taught to elementary school kids, but not in preparation for a test because they're given real problems to solve. They learn that this is actually interesting, this is actually fun, and if I finish working on this, I have something that I can be proud of. And as the result of that, they're also learning the math processes and the science processes and the critical thinking processes that are necessary to build other skills in middle school and high school and therefore in college.
One of the things that some teachers have told me, and Ms. Bloodworth, maybe you can weigh in on it, is this credit recovery program. And basically, here's a theory, and this is what I've been told, is that students are going through high school, and then if they do not have the credits to graduate, because of this desire to get, number one, get them out and get the numbers out, they sit them in front of a computer, they say, here's the thing, study this, learn this, they kind of pass the test, they work at it till they pass the test, and then all of a sudden they graduate. Number one, is that actually going on? And number two, is this a proper way of getting students prepared for college and having them graduate?
Well, I'm not extremely familiar with everything that goes on in the city with credit recovery, but I do know that some schools do that for sure. I've seen it. There are schools that don't do it. There are schools that have classes for those students. There's schools that do after-school tutoring and then allow them to do a summer program, but they're actually interacting and they're actually, like any class that you fail, they're retaking it to try to make that up. Most schools are doing that only if they passed the Regents test but failed the class, meaning that they either weren't showing up, weren't turning things in. So I think it really depends on the situation whether or not that can be an acceptable means.
Is your experience in just seeing the students who graduate that a lot of these students are not prepared? The numbers certainly bear that out. Is this one of the reasons why? They're just graduating students without, they'll hold them back in 3rd and 4th grade, but when it comes to 11th and 12th grade, you know what, we're going to get them out of the school pretty quick. I mean, do you feel that that's happening?
It's definitely happening.
One of the schools, one of my first Teach for Americans I worked with was actually in a high school dedicated to doing just that. It was, unfortunately, at the high school that I used to teach in, which was closed, and 7 schools were, it was Adlai Stevenson High School, which was once a very good comprehensive high school, not far from Monroe, as we were talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. And this school was Bronx Community High School. And the Teach for American, who could have been a really good teacher, was so frustrated because he had to take kids in 10-week segments and do world history in 10 weeks. It was almost like teaching consistent summer school. Test them, all right, in such a manner so that they could get retested and retested and retested.
Because the objective was not to educate them, but to get them to pass so that they could graduate.
Right, like a series of GEDs. You pass this part, then you pass that part, you pass that part, good, you get enough credit, bingo, you're done with that. Oh, you didn't get it, you'll take it again the next 10-week cycle. So yeah, it was there.
How do we're almost out of time, how do we reverse the trends? Teachers in the unions are being beaten up on op-ed pages, you alluded to it at the outset. Certainly, city administrators all across the country are saying these unions are not allowing us to operate the schools as we want to operate them, plus the emphasis on testing and some of the other trends that we've talked about. Is it politics? Is it money? Is it Occupy Wall Street? I mean, how do you reverse the trends from your way of thinking so that the schools get realigned in ways that can be productive?
I think you go back and you talk to the people who know education the most, and those are the teachers, people who are inside. Most change is done from the ground up. The best reforms, the best programs, for example, the WISE program that I told you about.
Yeah, why don't we talk about that for a moment?
WISE program is a program that started in Woodlands High School in 1972 as a solution to senior slump. And the idea was to give students, seniors in their second semester, credit for social studies and English, and they would go out and work on a project during that time. They were rescheduled. It could be an internship. It could be a project of their own. It could be something. But one of the keys was that they had to be interested in it. It had to be a passion. They had a mentor, and they had to write, and they had to read.
In order for this program to grow and reach more young people, what has to happen? It's a matter of money, it's a matter of awareness?
It's not even that much a matter of money. It's a matter of changing the way we think about what our goals are in schools with kids. Is it to teach them to pass tests, or is it teach them to pass the ultimate test, which is how to be human in our economic and political structure in our society?
Ms. Bloodworth, we'll give you the final word. What do you think? What ought we to do right now to realign our schools so that you feel more comfortable that instead of just, for example, putting them through so they graduate, but they really graduate with something that's worth having?
Well, I have to say I agree with David. It's very much about getting back to the basics, figuring out what works. There's classrooms all over the United States that are extremely successful at what they do. And even in the Bronx, there are schools that are, diamonds in the rough in areas where the students are in extreme poverty. There's tons of things going on in the community and at home. And these students are still doing amazingly, even compared to other schools in the neighborhoods that they're in.
So we've got to I've got to cut you off because we're out of time. We've got to look at what works, but what works not necessarily from a grades and A, B, C, or D perspective, but from a productivity and get a different way of assessing who the children are.
There's not one solution. I mean, I'll end with that, I guess.
Authentic assessment.
Authentic assessment. All right. That's a nice way to conclude it. David Green, thank you so much.
Thank you, Gary.
Aaron Bloodworth, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then you can email them to us at BronxTalk@hotmail.com. And we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Archives of our program are available at bronxnet.org. You click Bronx Talk on the right-hand navigation bar. You click it right there, and you can see all our archives right there. Next week, of course, we'll be back Monday nights at 9, as always, for Bronx Talk. Now, in our 18th year, we want to thank our producer, Jane Folloro, our director, Michael Arias, Dina, and all the cast of thousands who are around us. And to you, good night.
Underneath everything we are, underneath everything we do, we are all people, connected, interdependent, united. And when we reach out a hand to one, we can influence the condition of all. That's what it means to live united.
I'm lucky. Let me help you with that. I get to do something I love. It has nothing to do with touchdowns or titles. Everybody bring it in. I get to play a part in the life of someone just starting out. How many of you think homework is just as important as teamwork? I help keep kids in school. Good. And that's the name of the game. My name is LaDainian Thomason. I don't just wear the shirt, I live it.
Give, advocate, volunteer. Live united.